I was sitting on a terrace in Provence, watching my son Jason laugh with his new bride Marie, when my phone started buzzing like an angry hornet trapped in a jar. The bourbon in my glass cost more than most people's monthly car payments, and for the first time in 20 years, my blood pressure wasn't trying to punch through my skull like a jackhammer. The lavender-scented air mixed with the sound of French conversation and clinking glasses, creating the kind of peace I'd forgotten existed. I'm Andrew Patterson, 49 years old, and I'd been running data center operations since these MBA kids were still figuring out which end of a screwdriver to hold. 22 years in the business, 8 of those after my Navy stint where I learned that complex systems require respect, patience, and someone who actually understands how they work. Jason had met Marie during his semester abroad in Lyon, and their wedding was everything a father could hope for: small, intimate, meaningful. The vineyard belonged to Marie's family, and watching my son speak French with his new in-laws made me proud in a way that had nothing to do with technical certifications or performance reviews. The phone wouldn't quit. 17 Slack notifications, 4 voicemails. Then that face popped up on the screen. Christopher Donovan, the CEO's 28-year-old son who thought cloud computing involved actual weather patterns and whose biggest technical achievement was connecting his gaming console to Wi-Fi without calling customer support. I let it ring. Took another sip of bourbon that tasted like liquid oak and distant promises. It tasted like freedom from 3 a.m. emergency calls and weekend server migrations. "Dad, aren't you going to answer that?" Jason asked, looking concerned. He knew the drill from growing up. He knew that when Dad's phone started going crazy, it usually meant the internet was about to die somewhere important, and Dad would disappear into his home office for the next 12 hours. "Nope," I said, popping a piece of aged cheese in my mouth. "I'm on paid vacation." The vacation part is the most important word in that sentence, but the buzzing didn't stop. It was vibrating against the wrought iron table like it was having some kind of electronic seizure. I could see Marie's parents glancing over with that polite European concern that translates to Americans and their technology addiction. I sighed, the kind of deep, soul-crushing sigh that usually precedes either a resignation letter or a homicide charge, and picked up the phone. "Hello, Christopher. Get back from wherever the hell you are or you're fired." His voice cracked like a teenager trying to order beer. He was screaming so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. I could hear the background noise, that distinctive high-pitched whine of server fans ramping up to maximum RPM, like 1,000 angry mosquitoes having a nervous breakdown. It's a sound I know better than my own heartbeat. It's the sound of a system screaming for help. "Christopher," I said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "I'm 4,000 miles away. I'm at my son's wedding. I submitted this vacation request 6 months ago. Your father approved it personally. We discussed it in the quarterly planning meeting. I don't care what Dad did. The dashboard is red. Everything is red. You need to log in and fix the cooling system or you're done. Pack your desk." I looked across the table at Jason, who was holding Marie's hand and trying not to look worried. This was supposed to be his day. Their day. Not another emergency call that turned family time into technical support. "Christopher, I can see you're upset, but I need you to calm down and think clearly. What exactly is showing red on the dashboard?" "Everything. Temperature warnings, pressure alerts, some kind of system authorization error. Kyle says the cooling system is locked out and none of our passwords work." Kyle. The intern who thought Python was a reptile and had once asked me if we needed to feed the servers. If Kyle was their first line of defense, they were already in deeper trouble than they realized. "Have you called TechFlow? They're supposed to be handling primary monitoring now, remember? That was your decision last month. TechFlow is useless. They keep saying it's outside their scope of work. They can reboot servers, but they can't touch the HVAC controls. That's your system, your custom setup, your problem." Now we were getting to the heart of it. Christopher had spent the last 3 months systematically dismantling everything I'd built, outsourcing what he could and dismissing what he couldn't understand. But when push came to shove, when the system was actually failing, suddenly it was my system again. "I understand your frustration, but I can't help you remotely. My admin access was revoked yesterday, remember? You said we needed to streamline access protocols and eliminate single points of failure. You gave my credentials to TechFlow, then get on a plane. If you aren't here in 12 hours, you're terminated for cause, insubordination, abandonment of duties. I'll make sure you never work in tech again." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a burned circuit board. Jason was watching me now, that look of resigned disappointment I'd seen too many times over the years. How many birthdays, school plays, little league games had been interrupted by exactly this kind of call? I looked at the vineyard stretching toward the horizon. I looked at Marie's grandmother, who was telling stories in rapid French that made everyone laugh. I thought about the last decade of missed family moments, the gray hairs earned from keeping other people's systems running, the fact that I was one of maybe 3 people in the Southwest who understood our Phoenix data center's custom cooling system well enough to keep it from melting into expensive slag. And this kid with a spray tan and a business degree was screaming at me like I was some kind of on-call servant. Something inside me clicked, not a loud snap, a quiet metallic sound like a well-oiled lock engaging. "Christopher," I said softly. "What? You're coming back?" "No. I'm fired. Effective immediately. Thank you for clarifying my employment status." "Wait, what? You can't just quit in the middle of a crisis." "I'm not quitting, Christopher. You just fired me. I'm simply accepting your termination. Since I'm no longer an employee, I have no authority to access company systems. I just logged out of everything. Slack, email, VPN, all of it. You can't do that. This is sabotage. This is criminal." I hung up. Didn't just hang up. I powered the phone down completely and slipped it into my jacket pocket like I was holstering a weapon I'd just emptied. "Dad?" Jason asked, his voice careful. "Everything okay?" I smiled. A real smile, the kind that shows teeth and means it. "Everything's perfect, son. Your mother always said I worked too much. Looks like that problem just solved itself. Pass me some more of that excellent cheese." But in my head, I was already counting down. Christopher had no idea what he'd just triggered. To understand why I was willing to let a server farm worth more than a small country's GDP melt into expensive slag, you need to understand Christopher Donovan's reign of technical terror. Christopher didn't walk into our Phoenix office 3 months ago. He strutted, fresh out of some prestigious MBA program that apparently taught him that disruption meant firing everyone who actually knew how the lights worked. He showed up wearing a suit that cost more than my truck and smelling like expensive cologne and unearned confidence. The first meeting was a bloodbath. He gathered the entire operations team in the glass-walled conference room that overlooked the server floor. I sat in the back, nursing my 3rd coffee of the day, holding a notepad that contained the intricate, delicate blueprint of our custom cooling system, a system I'd spent a decade perfecting. Our Phoenix data center isn't your typical cookie-cutter facility. It's an older building, a converted aerospace manufacturing plant that we'd retrofitted with high-density blade servers. These machines run hotter than a barbecue grill in August, generating more heat per square foot than most small furnaces. The Arizona climate doesn't help. When it's 115 degrees outside, every BTU of cooling becomes precious. I'd spent 10 years tweaking the HVAC logic, writing custom firmware that balanced airflow, humidity, and coolant pressure in a precise mechanical ballet. The system monitored 847 different sensors, adjusted flow rates every 30 seconds, and could compensate for everything from a failed fan bearing to a refrigerant leak. It wasn't just engineering, it was art. Christopher stood at the front with a PowerPoint slide that simply said Innovation 2.0 in some trendy font and pointed directly at me. "Andrew," he said, reading my name off an organizational chart. "You're the senior operations engineer, correct?" "Senior infrastructure engineer, yes." "Right. See, looking at your salary and your tenure here, it feels very legacy. We're moving toward a cloud-native, agile, operational mindset. Having one person hold all the institutional knowledge, that's what we call a bottleneck. Bad for scaling, bad for business continuity." "It's not a bottleneck," I said, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. "It's specialized expertise. The cooling system in Sector 4 requires manual load balancing every 48 hours, or the pressure differential causes valve seizure. The thermal mapping isn't something you can just automate with an off-the-shelf solution." He laughed. Actually laughed out loud. A dismissive sound that made my jaw clench. "Everything can be automated, Andrew. That's the problem with your generation. You create complexity to justify job security. We're bringing in TechFlow solutions. They're a third-party monitoring service. Young, dynamic, cost-effective. They'll handle all routine maintenance for half what we're paying you. My blood ran cold. TechFlow. I knew them by reputation. They were a bottom feeder operation that hired recent graduates, gave them a troubleshooting script, and paid them minimum wage to reboot servers when dashboard lights turned red. They wouldn't know a pressure relief valve from a bicycle pump. "Christopher," I said, standing up slowly, "if you let TechFlow modify the HVAC control logic, you will melt this entire facility. I'm not being dramatic or territorial. I'm being mathematically precise. The thermal density in those server racks exceeds 40 kilowatts per cabinet. If coolant circulation stops for more than 20 minutes, internal temperatures hit critical mass. At that point, the Halon fire suppression system triggers automatically. Once Halon deploys, you have 90 seconds to evacuate before the oxygen concentration drops below sustainable levels." He waved his hand dismissively, like he was swatting away an annoying fly. "You're being emotional and resistant to change. This is exactly why we need fresh perspective. You're too attached to legacy systems." Emotional. The word hit me like a slap. I sat down without saying another word. Over the following weeks, I watched Christopher systematically dismantle everything I'd built. He demoted my two most experienced technicians, guys who'd worked with me for over a decade and could troubleshoot cooling problems by listening to pump harmonics. He signed the TechFlow contract without reading the technical specifications. He stripped away my budget authority, my hiring input, and my access to strategic planning meetings. But Christopher made one critical miscalculation. He assumed that because I was legacy, I was also naive. What Christopher didn't understand was that I'd designed the cooling system with the same paranoid security mindset I'd learned in Navy communications. The automation he loved so much, all those nice green lights on his dashboard, was actually dependent on an authentication protocol running on my personal workstation. Every 48 hours, the system performed what I called an operator wellness check. It looked for my specific digital signature, a cryptographic token that confirmed authorized personnel were monitoring the system. If it detected my signature, everything continued normal operation. If it didn't detect my signature for 2 consecutive cycles, the system assumed a security breach, hostile takeover, or catastrophic personnel loss. To protect the expensive hardware from unauthorized modifications or incompetent interference, the system would automatically revert every single setting to factory defaults and lock out all remote access until a senior engineer could physically reset the controllers. Factory default settings for industrial chillers, completely off. I'd tried to warn him. The week before my vacation, I'd sent a detailed email with the subject line, "Critical System Dependencies, Required Reading," explaining the authentication requirements. Christopher's response was exactly 4 characters, TLDR, too long, didn't read, the epitaph of his career. So when Christopher screamed through that phone, calling me insubordinate and threatening to ruin my career, he wasn't just insulting an employee. He was triggering the employment termination clause built into my own security protocol. The moment he said "you're fired," my employment status changed in the system logs. The moment my employment status changed, my digital signature became invalid. The 48-hour countdown had just begun. Back in Phoenix, 4,000 miles from my bourbon and Jason's wedding, the situation was about to deteriorate faster than a chocolate bar in a Phoenix parking lot. I could picture the scene unfolding in Phoenix with perfect clarity because I'd lived through similar drills dozens of times. But this wasn't a drill. The main operations center is a glass fishbowl in the center of our building, designed so management can see the team working. Usually it hums with quiet professionalism. Green lights on the wall-mounted monitoring displays, gentle keyboard clicking, the occasional phone call to a client about routine maintenance windows. Right now it would be a disco of flashing warning strobes. Nicholas, the 22-year-old intern who'd once asked me if servers needed antivirus software, was probably hyperventilating into a paper bag. The 2 TechFlow contractors, I'll call them clueless and hopeless, would be staring at the main dashboard like cavemen discovering fire. "Just reboot the HVAC controller," Christopher would be shouting, pacing back and forth in those Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Sweat would be starting to show through his expensive dress shirt. "It's just a computer. Turn it off and back on." "We tried, sir," Clueless would stammer, pointing at his laptop screen. "We sent the restart command to the master node. It's refusing to execute." "What do you mean refusing? It's a machine. Machines do what they're told. It says unauthorized user credential." We tried the admin password you gave us. The system won't accept it. That's because the admin password Christopher had was for the Windows domain controller. It had nothing to do with the embedded firmware that actually controlled the chillers. I'd separated those access layers 5 years ago after a particularly nasty ransomware attack that tried to encrypt our thermostat settings. The cooling system's brain, the part that actually opened and closed valves, controlled pump speeds, and managed refrigerant flow, only responded to one cryptographic signature: mine. "Sir," Hopeless would pipe up, his voice trembling. Ambient temperature in row C just hit 88 degrees. The internal server fans are ramping up, but they're just moving hot air around. Why isn't the air conditioning working? The main compressor units have shut down. They're in protective mode. Protective sounds good. That means they're protecting themselves, right? No, sir. Protective mode means they turn themselves off to prevent catastrophic mechanical failure. They're designed to shut down when they receive conflicting control signals. Right now, they're waiting for manual authorization to restart. Christopher would be staring at the wall of monitors, watching client names blink from green to yellow to angry red. Regional banks, healthcare networks, logistics companies, real businesses with real customers who were about to experience a very real service interruption. How long before things get critical? The TechFlow tech would check his monitoring software, probably some off-the-shelf package that looked impressive but couldn't actually control anything. Thermal shutdown threshold for the storage arrays is 105 degrees Fahrenheit. At current rate of temperature increase, maybe 18 minutes. Open the doors, get portable fans, bring ice from the break room, and that's the exact moment when technical crisis would transform into physical comedy. I imagined them running around like characters in a silent film, grabbing bag after bag of ice from the employee refrigerator, dragging desktop fans from cubicles, propping open emergency exits to let in 115-degree Arizona air. It would be like trying to cool a blast furnace with a handheld hairdryer. Meanwhile, the client impact reports would be rolling in. It always starts the same way: automated monitoring alerts that most people ignore. High response times, increased latency, packet loss warnings. Then the phone calls begin. "This is First National Bank of Scottsdale. Our transaction processing time just went from 200 milliseconds to 8 seconds. We can't authorize credit card payments. What's your ETA on resolution?" Regional medical network calling. "Our patient database is timing out. We have emergency room doctors waiting 5 minutes for CT scan results. This is unacceptable. Phoenix Trading Solutions here. We're losing $12,000 per minute on failed transactions. Our high-frequency algorithms can't function with this latency. Fix this immediately, or we're invoking breach of contract penalties." Christopher, trapped in his glass office watching his first quarter as VP operations evaporate in real time, would be cycling through the 5 stages of technical grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and calling daddy. "Do something!" He'd shriek at the TechFlow supervisor, a guy named Brandon who looked like he should be asking if you wanted fries with that. "We're trying to reroute the server loads to the backup cooling zones," Brandon would yell back, sweat dripping onto his laptop keyboard. "But the virtualization management system is lagging because the host CPUs are thermal throttling. English, speak English. The computers are slowing themselves down so they don't melt. Everything's running at 25% normal speed. Where's the documentation? Andrew must have left manuals, procedures, something." Ah, the documentation. That was a beautiful irony. I had indeed created extensive documentation, detailed step-by-step guides, system diagrams, emergency contact lists, troubleshooting flowcharts, everything stored in a shared network folder called Critical Infrastructure Procedures. Remember Christopher's efficiency initiatives from last month? His directive to eliminate digital clutter and optimize storage utilization? He'd ordered the IT department to automatically archive any files that hadn't been accessed in the past 90 days. Since I'd been doing my job correctly, preventing emergencies rather than responding to them, the disaster recovery documentation hadn't been opened since the last quarterly review. The automated system had dutifully moved everything to long-term tape storage in a climate-controlled facility in Nevada. Those tapes were currently sitting in a warehouse, filed alphabetically, accessible only during business hours with 48-hour advance notice. "The procedure folder is empty," Nicholas would cry out, his voice cracking with panic. "There's nothing here except a bunch of memes." That part was true. I did maintain a collection of workplace humor on the shared drive. carefully curated Navy-appropriate memes about the eternal struggle between engineers and management. I'd hidden them in a folder labeled Essential Workflow Documentation to keep them safe from corporate content filters. Right about now, they'd be clicking through images of grumpy cats with captions about network outages and Wile E. Coyote falling off cliffs labeled quarterly budget cuts. "He sabotaged us," Christopher would roar, his voice reaching frequencies that only dolphins could hear. "This is intentional. This is criminal negligence." "Sir," Nicholas would say, finding his backbone for probably the first time in his internship, "you signed the archive order, and you also signed his termination. The system logs show his access was revoked at 14:23 local time. By now, the physical environment inside the server room would be approaching conditions normally, associated with industrial smelting operations. If you've never experienced a data center cooling failure, imagine standing inside a running jet engine while someone slowly turns up a giant hairdryer. The sound would be deafening, thousands of server fans spinning at maximum RPM, creating a wall of white noise that vibrates in your chest. The smell would be getting serious. Burning dust, heated metal, the distinct ozone scent of electronics operating well beyond their design specifications. The hot aisle, the space behind the server racks where exhaust air gets expelled, would be pushing 125 degrees. The cold aisle, supposed to maintain a comfortable 65 degrees, would be climbing past 95. And somewhere in his Scottsdale office, the CEO, Michael Donovan, would be about to receive the phone call that would ruin his afternoon. Michael Donovan wasn't a technical guy. He was a money guy who understood one fundamental principle. When expensive things break, somebody pays. He'd built the company from a small regional hosting provider into a major Southwest data center operation by recognizing talent and staying out of their way. He was currently in his corner office, reviewing quarterly reports when his phone rang. Not his desk phone, his personal cell, the number reserved for actual emergencies. "Mike," Kevin's voice was tight. Kevin ran legal and never called unless lawsuits were imminent. "We have a situation at the Phoenix facility. Fire suppression is pre-arming. Is there a fire?" "No, sir. Overheating. Complete cooling system failure. Every rack in Sector 4. Well, fix it. Tell Christopher to handle it." Christopher fired Andrew Brennan effective immediately. Apparently, the cooling system requires Andrew's personal authorization to function. The silence on that line probably cost about $15,000 in lost revenue. He did what? "Sir, the insurance underwriters specifically listed Andrew as critical personnel. His termination without cause voids our coverage for infrastructure failure. We're looking at full liability exposure." Back in the operations center, the conference room phone was ringing with that particular urgency that means someone important is very unhappy. Christopher looked at the caller ID like it was displaying his own death warrant. He picked up with trembling hands. "Dad? You fired Andrew?" The voice was so loud that both TechFlow contractors heard every word clearly. "He was insubordinate. He abandoned his post. He's holding the system hostage from France." "He didn't hold it hostage, you idiot. He built it. I kept him on payroll at $30,000 above market rate specifically because he's irreplaceable. Do you understand what happens when we lose $2 million in client contracts because my son wanted to play CEO? Dad, it's 112 degrees in there. The Halon system is warming up. The servers are screaming. What do? You pray. And you get me Andrew's number. Right now." Meanwhile, in Provence, I was enjoying what the French call l'art de vivre, the art of living well. The evening air was perfect, the wine was excellent, and my phone was blissfully silent in my jacket pocket, until it buzzed again. Michael Donovan. I looked at the caller ID. In negotiations, timing is everything. Answer too quickly, you look desperate. Wait too long, you look petty. I let it ring twice, then sent a text. "Hi, Michael. At Jason's wedding reception. Reception spotty here. Is this urgent?" The response came back in 3 seconds. "Urgent. Call me. Name your price." I smiled and showed Jason the text. "Your old man just got a raise." I walked away from the dinner table to a quiet spot near the vineyard's edge, where fairy lights twinkled between grapevines and French conversation provided pleasant background noise. I called Michael. "Andrew, thank God. Fix this. Whatever Christopher did, whatever he said, fix it." "I can't, Michael. I'm no longer an employee. I'm just a tourist in France. If I access your systems now, that's a federal crime under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. Your son made that very clear. I'm rehiring you, right now, immediately. Full reinstatement. That's generous, but I don't want my old job back. The working conditions were clearly unsatisfactory. Then what do you want? I looked back toward the reception, where Marie's grandmother was dancing with Jason to some French song I didn't recognize, where my son looked happier than I'd seen him in years. I want a consulting contract. External contractor, independent status. My rate is $400 per hour with a minimum 12-month retainer paid up front. I also want the interim CTO position until you find someone qualified to replace Christopher. And I want a written letter from Christopher, notarized, acknowledging his technical incompetence and accepting full responsibility for this incident. Done. How much for the retainer? $200,000. Wire transfer. I'll need confirmation before I touch anything. Highway robbery. Supply and demand, Michael. Basic economics. Isn't that what business school teaches? I heard him shouting at someone about banking passwords and emergency wire transfers. In the background, I could hear what sounded like a jet engine mixed with car alarms, the sound of expensive electronics dying in real time. Sent. Confirmation number 9847 Delta Charlie. Check your account. I opened my banking app on my phone. The number that appeared made me smile. Pleasure doing business with you, Michael. I didn't need to travel to Phoenix or dig around for USB drives or find any physical documentation. Those were red herrings, distractions for the junior staff to chase while the real work happened through encrypted channels I'd established years ago. I opened my laptop, connected to the Vineyard's surprisingly robust Wi-Fi, and accessed my personal satellite uplink. The same system I'd used during desert deployments in the Navy, secure, encrypted, and completely independent of corporate networks. The authentication was biometric, fingerprint scanner, retinal scan, and a voice recognition system that confirmed my identity against a baseline recorded when I'd first installed the protocol. User Patterson Andrew, authorization level alpha, confirm emergency override protocol, confirmed, restoring factory settings and manual control. I typed a single command, sudo/systems emergency restore all. Force. Confirm. Yes. Auth. Patterson Alpha. The signal took 3.2 seconds to reach the satellite, bounce to Phoenix, penetrate the data center's firewall, and wake up the sleeping HVAC controllers. In Phoenix, silence shattered like glass. First came the metallic thunk of the main compressor clutches engaging, then the deep, mechanical roar of industrial chillers coming online. Not the high-pitched shriek of dying server fans, but the authoritative bass note of real cooling equipment doing real work. Arctic air blasted from every floor vent like nature's own air conditioning had suddenly remembered its job. The temperature readings on every monitor began dropping. 112 degrees, 108 degrees, 101 degrees, 95 degrees. The red warning strobes went dark. Halon deployment aborted flashed green across every screen. Thermal crisis resolved. System normal. Nicholas collapsed into a chair and started laughing with relief. The TechFlow contractors looked like they'd seen divine intervention. Christopher just stared at a new message appearing on his monitor. One I'd typed from 4,000 miles away. System restored. Current administrator, Andrew Patterson. Interim CTO, Christopher Donovan. Please surrender your access badge to security and remove personal items from the premises. Effective immediately. I closed the laptop and walked back to the reception, where Jason was waiting with a fresh glass of bourbon. Everything sorted out, Dad? Better than sorted. I just got promoted. The next morning's company-wide email was a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy. Andrew Patterson appointed Interim Chief Technology Officer, Strategic Restructuring of Operations Leadership. We look forward to continued excellence in service delivery. Christopher was escorted from the building by security. Last I heard, he's managing facilities maintenance at our Anchorage location. I hope he's learned to respect heating systems. I didn't return to Phoenix for 2 weeks. I took the entire vacation, drank excellent wine, and got to know my new daughter-in-law. When I finally walked into my new corner office with its view of the mountains, I found someone had left a small shrine on my desk. a framed photo of a confused-looking intern next to a bottle of premium hot sauce and a note that read, "Thank you for saving our jobs. The Phoenix Operations Team." I sat in my new ergonomic chair, adjusted my noise-canceling headphones, and pulled up the system dashboard. Everything glowed green. Cooling steady at 65 degrees. All servers running optimal. I wasn't the repair guy anymore. I was the architect, and the blueprints had just gotten a lot more expensive.